Tesloop is a ride-sharing company. Carmiq is a car-sharing company. And Rahul Sonnad is the CEO of both. It's the story of a startup that's exploring new opportunities in mobility. Underwriting for the production of Autoline This Week has been provided by RSM.
Prepare for challenges specific to your business by working with trusted advisors who help turn obstacles into opportunities. Experience the power of being understood. RSM, Audit, Tax, and Consulting for the Middle Market.
And now, here's your host, John McElroy.
I want to thank you all for joining us on Autoline This Week. Today we're going to be talking about the new mobility, ride sharing and car sharing. And the reason we're diving into that is we've got something of an expert here on it. Rahul Sonnad is the CEO of, I guess, two companies here, Tesloop and Carmiq.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for being on the show with us today, Rahul.
Yeah, Tesloop's the company and Carmiq's our new product that we've just released.
Okay, and we'll get into those details in just a minute, but I've got to explain that also joining us today are Joann Muller with Axios and Sam Abuelsamid with Navigant Research. And good to have the both of you on the show as well.
It's great to be back again, John.
Well, in a real quick thumbnail, Rahul, let's go through what is Tesloop, and then we'll get into Carmiq.
Sure, yeah. So we started Tesloop really inspired by the fact that cars are becoming electrified, connected, and semi-autonomous. And our feeling was that there's really a platform shift here to kind of a digital automobile. And so Tesloop, what we were doing is running a shuttle, like a Greyhound bus and Model X cars, very high-end, very automated, very personalized, and we did that for about 3 years.
And that was what, from LA to San Diego?
That was, yeah, first to LA to Vegas, then to Palm Springs, and then to San Diego.
And those were the only routes that you were running?
Right, so we were just in Southern California. And in the course of doing that, we built a lot of software to query the cars, manage them, open them, check the battery, check the mileage, share information with Goodyear Tires and Farmers Insurance. And we kind of realized that the value of doing that was very high. So recently we said, hey, instead of just using this on our cars, what if we enabled this to be used for every Tesla of anybody who wants to utilize this? So in October, we launched what we call Carmiq, which is a kind of a digital manager for car owners to manage their electric connected cars.
Just manage their cars, or to let other people rent them out when they're not using them?
Yeah, so when we think of things you can do with connectivity, it's grabbing data, storing it, analyzing it, look at battery behavior, driving behavior, and then services like facilitating tire service, insurance, car cleaning, those types of things. And then we think economically the most important is taking, the 20 plus hours that most cars sit and putting that back to work by renting it out to others.
How does it know the difference between my data and the person who rents my car?
Well, we know if it's being rented, or we know if it's not being rented. So we're gathering all of that data and storing it. But in our model, your car's data is your own. You have rights to that. We're not trying to take ownership of it. However, when it's being rented, then that data we are managing and kind of optimizing.
Are you also running the platform that enables the car sharing or the car rental service for owners, or are you just doing the data analytics part of it?
Yeah, no, we're just starting that. We did our first monthly peer-to-peer rental. We've been renting our own cars for a long time, doing one-way rentals from LA to San Diego in a kind of a high mileage, rent for 6 hours, rent back, rent there, rent back. But now we're starting peer-to-peer, so we're taking cars that we don't own and enabling the owners to rent them to other people. And we're starting that in a kind of long-term monthly mode, but then we'll also start enabling shorter term.
Rahul, one of the things I find so interesting with what you've done with Tesloop is you've racked up a lot of miles on some of these Teslas.
Right.
What's your experience with them from a maintenance, a depreciation, all that kind of standpoint?
Yeah, so I think at this point we have 8 out of the 10 highest mileage cars, all over 250,000 miles. The highest mileage is 450,000 miles, and we've done that, in just a little over 3 years. So, we were running a lot of miles. And our experience, I think, has been that it surprised us how little effort it is to keep these cars running. Now, on certain occasions, there have been problems with batteries that typically are, well, in all cases, have been covered by the warranty. We've had like 2 cars that are like exact same batch, same time. One has gone 350,000 miles with no battery problems. Others has had problems. So I think there's, at very high mileage, like battery chemistry changes, and there's some, I think, just unknowns for the whole industry. But the overall maintenance, like on that 450,000 mile car, has been about $20,000. And that includes things like where we drove it underwater and messed up the headlights. And a lot of that is air conditioning, because driving to like Palm Springs every day just means the air conditioning's on 24/7. So I think, they haven't really been designed for that type of service levels. But I think the interesting thing is you can have cars with hundreds of thousands of miles on them, and they're extremely reliable. Like, you're not worried, is something going to go wrong?
Yeah, I think one of the big questions with batteries is when you're continuously doing DC fast charging on them, the strain that puts on the batteries, and you combine that with the temperatures in Southern California. What sort of experience have you had? You mentioned some of the batteries have had to be replaced, but in general, the ones that have held up, how is the capacity of the battery held up over that time?
Yeah, degradation has never really been a problem. If you consider less than 15% degradation as not being a problem. So you might go from, 280 miles in range to losing 30, so you're at like 250 or something, which for us is good enough to get to San Diego, charge, come back. So in the context of, when we're doing ride shares, you'd see degradation, which means if you're going to Vegas, you'd have to charge more in the middle. But I think we were treating the batteries like the worst way you could, charging them as much as possible, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down, 4 times a day, fast charging, 24/7, Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's, just no stop. And still they did remarkably well, minus a few exceptions where, and what happened in those cases were usually the subsystems would shut the car down because they thought there was some problem, even though potentially there wasn't a problem. It was just the reading that was a safety protector.
Let's talk economics.
Yes.
Can you make money offering ride sharing like you've been doing?
Yeah.
And what kind of money might you be able to make your company, Carmiq?
Yeah.
And what could owners of cars make by renting out their cars?
Yeah. So when we think of kind of the economics, there's ride sharing where you're hiring a driver and somebody's booking a seat, or there's car sharing, which is basically like you're renting a car either for a short period or a longer period. And I think business-wise, they're very different. Like, the ride share economics are dominated by labor costs. Like, they become the majority of your
Meaning
costs.
the driver.
The driver, really.
This is the Uber model, right? You're talking
yeah,
about?
in our
long-range Uber model.
Yeah, in our model,
Okay.
it was like long-range Uber pool. So,
Okay.
I call that like a mini Greyhound bus. Like, you get 4 seats booked, and you go off. Now the interesting thing about doing long distance in cars versus buses is it's much more efficient when you have 4 people in a car, because you can pick everybody up along the way, drop them. You don't have a big overhead. People don't need to come to the edges. But the labor law, especially in California, is very challenging on many levels. I think in other states like Arizona or Florida, it would be much more attractive. But really, that business is a lot around managing people. You need customer support. You need what we called ground control, which is kind of a dispatch system, and then you need drivers, and all of those need to be working together. So that's kind of on the rideshare side. On the car share side, it's very different. Like the car share challenge is, I think if you own a car, to me, there's kind of two kinds of people. One is like, I just don't want anybody else in my car, and that's fine. There's a lot. Maybe I think that's the majority, maybe. And then there's other people who like, for the right price, absolutely, And I think the challenge for everybody is like right now, if you look at Tesla owners, probably like 0.1% do car sharing on these Turo or Get Around or something. So it's a tiny sliver. But to me, that's not because they don't want to do it. It's because just the hassle is too much. Like they don't need a second job cleaning cars and doing customer support. So our contention is by using connectivity, you can first look at how they're using the car, suggest when they want to share it, and then make that completely automated so they don't need to think about it. You can schedule the cleaning, you can schedule tire service, all of that as needed by leveraging connectivity, kind of like we were doing when we were doing rideshare. So if it really is just like, I use my car as I always have, but once in a while it leaves and comes back clean, I think that becomes much more attractive to a large number of people.
Is Carmiq planning to offer those kinds of ancillary services like the cleaning and relocation of cars, things like that?
Yes, absolutely. Now, not just like whether it's insurance or car cleaning, we don't plan on providing those, but we plan on coordinating all of them through the software.
Other providers.
Yeah.
Do you have employees that have to move those cars around for them?
Again, not our own. This would be through third parties. And again, our goal is to do this globally. So, in any given region, you're going to have different people and different labor laws and all of that. So we want to provide all the software that coordinates all of that. There's a huge layer of kind of managing expectations, policies, getting everything in place, coordinating all these services that really becomes critical when you're doing car sharing.
Okay, so let's say I got a Tesla,
Yes.
a 3, an X, an S.
Yes.
How much money could I make putting it into your system?
Yeah. So our feeling is there's two key scenarios. One is I'm driving my car every day, and maybe there's periods. Maybe I'm in San Francisco and I take the BART to work, and so I don't use it during weekdays, or maybe I don't use it on weekends, or maybe just between 9 and 5, while I'm at the bank, I don't use my car. So there's that kind of time slicing. And then the other scenario is just like my car's 3 years old, I'm thinking of selling it, but instead of selling it, I can rent it. And what we see now with the high mileage Teslas, meaning like over 40, 50,000 miles, is they're relatively cheap. You can get like a used Model S for $30,000 to $40,000 with free supercharging and autopilot, which is maybe like a $600 a month payment if you finance it. But that car will rent for close to $1,000 a month. So there's a pretty big, right now, like arbitrage opportunity in terms of the value of the car as a rental versus the cost of financing the car. And then I think if you're talking about time slicing it, it really depends on how much time you have. But I think, again, if you don't need your car on weekdays, you can probably pay for your car completely. So that would be like $800 for a Model 3, or maybe like $1,300 for a S or an X, depending on the type, but rough numbers. And I think the reality of the markets today, like Turo, Get Around, is that there's not that much liquidity. You're not sure how much it'll be used. They're very like nascent markets. So we think, when you start, there's going to be uncertainty. Maybe you'll make $300 this month. Maybe you'll make $900, depending on just if somebody comes into town and books it for 2 weeks, that type of thing. But I think quickly, as you get into next year, you're going to have a much more just fluid, liquid market. And the idea of making consistently, let's say if you have a $1,000 a month car, meaning like it costs $75,000 or something like that, that would be about $1,000 a month. I think the idea of making $50 a day is very reasonable. So that would, again, pay for the car.
In that second scenario you described of buying a car to use just for this type of service, as opposed to the time slicing. Do you see people buying, just having one car that they use for that, or maybe buying a small fleet and operating that as a business of their own, essentially being their own car rental firm?
Yeah, so I think you're seeing people start doing that in Turo with Teslas and with other sets of cars. I think there's a very attractive, very short-term opportunity for getting a bunch of cars and doing that. We actually see the bigger opportunity just for people not buying a car to do it, but rather I have an old car, and instead of selling it, it becomes the alternative. So just for example, our first car that we call E-Hawk has 450,000 miles. If you go to Kelley Blue Book, it says the value is $15,000, because it's high miles. But it happens to have like a relatively new battery, and we can rent that out for $1,000 a month easily. So like in 1 year, or 15 months, we get the full value of the car back. So clearly, it doesn't make sense to sell that car versus renting it. And I think that's kind of a very pronounced case because the mileage is so high. But I think you see that even on a car with like 50,000 miles.
Connectivity is something that's rapidly becoming standard on pretty much all new cars.
Yeah.
It certainly will be within the next few years.
Yeah.
Did you have to work with Tesla to develop your platform to get the information, to extract the information that you're using, and do you see yourself expanding beyond Tesla with your platform?
Yeah. So Tesla's an open platform where the owner can delegate access to their connectivity to anybody they see fit to. That said, because we were running in fleet mode, we have a fleet API agreement, which is a few special different things, like you can't disable it on the cars and what have you.
Wait, what's an API?
Oh, right. API is a programmatic interface. So this is what lets you call with a computer to Tesla servers that then talk to the car in real time, pretty much. So we can say, where's the car, open the doors, limit the top speed. Our feeling is that the biggest economic opportunity is really on electric cars, because if you have a car that's going to last 500,000 or more miles, which I think every normal Tesla will, you'll never run it into the ground yourself, because that's too many miles. Whereas if you have if you loan me your BMW 3 Series and I give it to somebody, they drive it to Vegas and back, and I give you $200. You're like, okay, I made $200, but am I making money? Am I losing money? It's hard to figure that out. And if you do that enough, your car's dead. Whereas if it's a Model 3 or something, even if you put 200,000 miles doing that, you still have plenty of mileage left for yourself. So we feel the economics of EV, they're kind of like free miles that are out there. And so we're very focused on that. But we, in part, changed the product name to Carmiq because of the realization that Porsche and Audi and VW and probably several other manufacturers in the near future will have cars that are equivalent to Tesla in terms of their connectivity and electric drivetrains.
There's as you mentioned, there's a bunch of new EVs coming to market in the already now and in the very near future. Are you also looking at more mainstream brands like Hyundai and Kia, for example? They've got the Kona EV, the Kia Niro EV, and others. That might be available to people at more affordable price points? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, our feeling is that if you have a connected car, it should clearly be on a connected network. It's kind of like in 1990, you bought a PC and you were doing like Lotus 123 and you weren't on a network. And then, by 95, you were on AOL or the internet or something. And then once you're on the network, you'd never go back.
Right.
And we think kind of that's going to happen in the next couple of years. So every connected car should be connected to something that stores your data, that manages it, that analyzes it, that becomes your Carfax when you sell it. So again, our focus is going to be on EVs, but any EV we want to cover. And EVs are a little different because of battery management and what have you. But the difference is if you have a Ioniq or something, you can't just give us your credentials. We would have to get cooperation from the OEM.
You don't have the API access that you'd have with Tesla right now.
Yeah, exactly. So like in GM's case, they have kind of a walled garden where you apply to a developer program, you get approved. We've gone through that process. So that is once you do that, then the owners can give you access. And I think that's kind of like the Apple App Store where they look at everything, and I think that makes sense. But others are just like closed off, and there's no current like mechanism to get that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about autonomy.
Yeah.
That's what I focus on
Yep.
at Axios.
Yep.
And obviously Teslas are equipped with a fair bit of assisted driving technology called autopilot,
Yep.
not self-driving.
Yep.
For the record, it is not a self-driving car. But I'm concerned about this sharing model.
Yep.
When people are borrowing a car that they don't know or understand the technology, how do we educate them? And
Yeah.
should there be some restrictions on them using that technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think the education question is super important, and our goal is to be able to educate people remotely when they get in the car, on their phone, over video, show them how to use that. We've been doing that. Like when we would hire what we call pilots to drive our cars in the rideshare mode, they would have a 2-day training course, and we'd show them everything. We've condensed the essentials of that down to like 10 minutes for all the controls of the car and everything that we remotely administer to people the first time they're driving in a car. But I think the statistical reality will be that if you show them how to turn autopilot on in a year or two, it will be safer than if they're trying to drive it without that, or trying to drive a car that doesn't have that. Now that makes some assumptions on the progress of autopilot, but we're seeing it move rapidly forward. And like a lot of things, like going out of your lane and hitting somebody, or taking a left, turning into somebody's lane, I think are becoming very mitigated. Like the car is not letting you do that. It's very hard to rear end somebody with autopilot on the highway in Teslas today. So I think the education becomes critical, because the controls are not like completely intuitive. It's not like you drop into a car and you know how to.
My next question to you is beyond the autopilot question, just the HMI, the human and machine interface in general in Teslas tends to be a little different from most other cars.
Yeah.
And so does that education, that training video that you show them, does that also kind of walk them through some of how to adjust the climate controls in a Model 3, for example, or change wiper speeds?
Yeah,
like
and to be clear, that's not a video, that's live training that we do interactively with them, because I think you need to be able to answer questions and show them and confirm they know how to do it and everything. So, which again, if you're a Tesla owner, you probably don't have the skills to do that well. So we think, taking that on ourselves is important. Yeah, so I think there's a full set of things you got to show people. That said, I think I'm a big fan of the user experience in the Tesla, like the machine-human interactions and everything. But like you're saying, it takes a little bit of getting used to. You have to kind of understand the boundaries and what happens, and what you need to do and what you don't need to do. So. Yeah, it's important to.
So just to understand how this would happen, I want to rent a Tesla for a week.
Yeah.
I go on your platform, Carmiq, and I arrange to rent someone, an individual's car.
Yeah.
Then someone from your company brings me that car and gives me a 10-minute rundown of the technology.
Slightly different. So, so either you come to the car, or maybe the car's delivered to you. And that would be by not us, but some third party. And then we would get on the video phone with you, and while you're, before we let you take the car off, we would, while you're in the car, make sure you know how to use the autopilot, if it has it. All of the cars don't have it.
So it's a live instruction over video, not in person.
Correct. And we think that's the only thing that scales. Like you can't, train somebody in, Grand Rapids and New Jersey and without doing it over video.
Rahul, I'm very interested. You probably have more experience with Teslas than anybody outside of Tesla.
Yeah, I mean,
Do they come work with you guys? Are they interested in what you're doing? What's been the interaction with the company?
Yeah, I mean, they're very supportive. They, there's a lot of different people there, and they're very focused on building cars. So the whole idea of mobility today is like, great Glad you're doing it. We're dealing with making these Model 3s, you know. So, you know, I think they have clear plans to, at least post-autonomy, get into the space. I think there's a lot of human psychology issues that have to be dealt with in order to do that. And I would say there's a handful of technical features that they have not yet enabled that seem relatively easy, but just not, like, we haven't gotten prioritized. Like, we think tire pressure should clearly be remotely accessible, which it's not, or seatbelt state. So if you want to know if your kids are driving with their friends and somebody doesn't have a seatbelt on, you should be able to be alerted for that. Like today, you can't do that. So I think they have like a set of core foundational work to do, not a lot of work. Like they've done 95% of it and they've done the hard work, but there's a few things that are missing. One other very important thing missing is if you don't have connectivity to the car, you now can't get into the car, which means you need a physical thing like a key or a card or something. And that's another problem. But you know, my guess is they'll pull their heads up at some point and say, okay, now we're going to really make a mobility platform here, because they certainly need it for their own aspirations.
They do, and with that, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap this discussion up. Very interesting what you're doing here with Tesloop and Carmiq.
Okay, thank you.
Rahul Sonnad, thanks so much for coming on Autoline this week. Really appreciate your insights.
Thanks.
And Joann Muller from Axios, Sam Abuelsamid from Navigant Research. Thank you guys,
John.
too. Very interesting what's going on here, and I hope you found it as interesting as I do.
Underwriting for the production of Autoline This Week has been provided by RSM.
Prepare for challenges specific to your business by working with trusted advisors who help turn obstacles into opportunities. Experience the power of being understood. RSM, Audit, Tax, and Consulting for the Middle Market.